Stanek, Chairman of the Public Service Commission. I'm joined with my colleagues today in this proceeding, which is docketed as Public Conference number 56, titled Federal Grant Opportunities for Utilities under the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. But we're going to be discussing more than just the IIJA today. We'll also be discussing the Inflation Reduction Act. So again, welcome to the Commission's second educational session on federal funding opportunities under both the IIJA, otherwise known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law or Bill, as well as the IRA. So we'll be discussing Bill and IRA today. Following the passage of these two landmark pieces of funding legislation back in 2021 and 2022, as well as Maryland's Climate Solutions Now Act, we've seen an unprecedented number of federal funding opportunities that both this commission, its regulated utilities, and the states are actively pursuing. Since then, the commission opened this docket, PC56, for our utilities to go forth and file monthly reports with us. And this is to allow full transparency and to broaden our understanding, as well as the public's understanding of which federal funding opportunities our utilities are pursuing. The commission has also been working with our partners at the Maryland Energy Administration and the U.S. Department of Energy to develop a series of virtual educational sessions. Our last educational session was held back on December 12th, where we hosted a representative from the Grid Deployment Office, as well as Kate Marks from Venn Strategies. And they explained to us some of the offerings that were available to help Maryland's utility infrastructure be more resilient and reliable. We're going to change gears today with our panel of distinguished DOE speakers, providing us with a broader overview of the various federal funding opportunities under both Bill and IRA that are available to the state of Maryland at large and not necessarily just to our regulated utilities. As noted, we have a distinguished panel of three Department of Energy experts with us from the Office of Policy, the Office of State and Community Energy Programs, as well as the DOE's Loan Program Office. I'd also like to thank our colleagues at the Maryland Energy Administration for helping to facilitate our panel today. Before I introduce our speakers, I'd just like to explain how we're going to use the balance of these 2 hours. We'll have our three DOE speakers speak for about 15 or 20 minutes each. Then myself and my four colleagues will have an opportunity to ask any questions that we may have, at which time the commissioners will exit, since it may become before the commissioners in a contested proceeding down in the future. But everybody else is free to remain in this virtual room. And Joey Chen, the host advisor, will open it up to broader Q&A from anybody participating on this call today. There's just a few folks, dignitaries that I'd like to recognize who are participating today, either themselves or representatives from their office, including Delegate Johnson, Delegate Fraser Hildago and his staff, Delegate Balfo, and Senator Mary Washington. I believe we also have Councilman Tom Hucker with us today, as well as staff from our Economic Matters Committee, as well as professional staff from DLS and the Education, Environment, and Energy Committee with us today as well. There may be others. I know we have colleagues from other state agencies on the line today, including MEA. So I'd like to thank all of you for your participation. At this point, I will go ahead and introduce our panelists. I'll do them one at a time as they're prepared to speak. The first panelist is Davey Nguyen. Mr. Nguyen is with the Office of Policy at DOE. He's the Deputy Director for State, Local, and Tribal and Territorial Policy in that office. Prior to joining that office, he worked for the Department of Interior's BOEM, which many of us in the offshore wind space are very familiar with the work of BOEM, where he coordinated initiatives on climate adaptation as well as having experience with EPA, and worked for the White House CEQ as well. So Mr. Nguyen is very familiar with navigating the political shoals of Washington, and we're glad him and his two colleagues are here today. So we'll hear from Mr. Nguyen first, and then we'll turn to his colleagues in due course. So good afternoon, Mr. Nguyen.
Mr. Chair, this is the host advisor. I am still coordinating Mr. Nguyen to get into the meeting room, but Mr. Castro is with us.
Okay, we will go further in our program. Virtual meetings are rarely, if ever, go without a hitch. I'd like to introduce Mr. Chris Castro. He is with the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of State and Community Energy Programs. He's the chief of staff of that office, and he previously served as the advisor to the mayor of the city of Orlando, Florida. Prior to working in Orlando, he served in various organizations, including the global sustainability nonprofit Ideas for Us, a clean energy consulting firm, also Citizens Energy. So we welcome Mr. Castro and look forward to hearing your thoughts coming from the Office of State and Community Energy Programs.
Thank you, Chairman Standek. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. I'm still waiting to enable my screen sharing capabilities. And actually, I see that Davey, my colleague, has been able to join us, and we organized this panel so that you all got a broad brush overview of what's going on from the IRA and bill at a policy level, and then to dive into the specifics here within SCEP and then over to LPO. With Davey being on the line, I'm actually going to turn it back over to him and go back into our regularly coordinated schedule.
Thank you, Mr. Castro. And Mr. Nguyen, if you're ready to go.
Yep, I am ready to go over here. Sorry, everybody, for the technical difficulties. Apparently, I missed a great introduction, so I feel like that's like the best part of going to some of these meetings. But I hope that you did me justice.
We did. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So I wasn't sure on your side if someone's going to run the slides. If not, I can also pull up my screen as well. I just want to confirm.
Maybe I just shared with you presenter privileges, so you should have them now.
Oh, great. Let me go ahead and do that. Sorry, all 1 second here. All right, hopefully folks can see a screen that says some Inflation Reduction Act opportunities. Does that track with everybody? Cool. So I know this says Inflation Reduction Act opportunities, but it's also going to cover some of the stuff in the bipartisan infrastructure law as well. And then like Chris Castro from the DOE side had sort of alluded to earlier, I think what we want to do is provide just a high-level overview of what's going on and with some of these pretty historic pieces of legislation, and then also kind of tear it down from the high-level policy level to what some of the other program offices are doing, particularly what's happening at the state and community level, and then also some of these opportunities to really realize some of the clean energy opportunities related to maybe some of our loan program authorities as well. So hopefully we'll have a pretty good group of people here to present some interesting opportunities. So just going to the next slide really quick. So there's three sort of main pieces of legislation that I think all of us are spending a lot of time on. Probably, I could probably say the same at the state level as well. But this is what we're considering the Investing in America's Energy Sector sort of strategy. And so the administration really put together this agenda and is bringing manufacturing and mainly manufacturing and clean energy back to America to help create new, good-paying, clean energy jobs in communities. So a lot of these investments are really going to help Americans sort of avoid things like just surprise spikes in monthly energy costs. A lot of that comes from things like more volatile fossil fuel markets, but also there's opportunities to bring additional financial security and peace of mind. Some of these can be realized through things like opportunities to save for energy efficiency savings at your home. But there's mainly these three pieces of legislation: the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, and then the Inflation Reduction Act. So I think all of you are pretty familiar with all of these, but together I think the investments that are captured in all of these opportunities really bring together, what we're going to consider like, a manufacturing boom. Also helps rebuild our infrastructure, bring back supply chains, like I said earlier, to the U.S., lower costs for hardworking families, and then also create jobs. And I think something that I'll touch on later is that a lot of the jobs that are going to be sort of brought online, or I guess some of the opportunities for jobs here don't actually require a four-year degree across the country. So on this slide here, there's again some high-level framing. The Inflation Reduction Act in itself delivers some historic firsts. I don't think I need to read all of these to you, but again, it does just provide long-term stability for domestic clean energy producers. That's a topic that I'll touch on a little bit here. It also has opportunities for manufacturing and also for investors. So I think some of the problem solving that we're really trying to do here is sort of what's been kind of this on again, off again pattern for clean energy credits. That's something that we'll also be talking about. So it provides sort of the first time per unit production incentives for solar, wind, batteries, critical minerals, all those things that can be realized in Maryland. And then also there's just a historic focus on labor that I was saying earlier. A lot of the tax credits that are also coming online. Some of the guidance has already been released by Treasury. DOE is working hand in hand with Treasury on that. But a lot of the tax credits are designed under like a 5 times multiplier for meeting prevailing wage requirements. So, a lot of this is like you get almost like a 20% of the value if you actually don't meet this standard. So again, a historic focus on quality of labor. And then it also provides consumers with incentives for, what I would say are, I think DOE says about thousands of dollars in home and transportation energy bill savings. So for example, there's EV tax credits in a rebate program. There's higher incentives for low-income consumers that can cover almost about 100% of the cost of switching to an efficient electric heat pump, as an example. And then also there's just opportunities for low and middle income consumers. That's something that we're looking at really closely within DOE. But a lot of these opportunities are targeted in historically underserved communities and communities most impacted by the clean energy transition. So we'll talk a little bit about coal in a second here, but I think there's a lot of opportunities to be thinking and planning and helping some of these communities transition, especially as coal power plants are retiring. There's a lot of them that are set to retire in the near future. So just at a high level, we're going to cover just a couple areas. I think consumer energy costs is one of these areas that we could spend just a little bit of time on here. But the IRA does extend about a 30% tax credit that's going to be available today for individuals and families investing in clean energy systems. The examples here are really focused on solar, but it also you can also think about it for solar water heating, wind, geothermal heat pumps, fuel cells, and then beginning this year, battery storage is also one of those opportunities. For residential solar electricity credits, this can save about $7,500 for the average household, and then the average household over time can save about $9,000 or about $400 annually. So again, a lot of opportunities to realize some of these tax credits, and this is really benefiting some of the consumers. And then we'll get into some of these opportunities for manufacturing. So there's a couple slides that I have here on manufacturing The first one is really just thinking about sort of what this opportunity means. So in addition to just incentivizing the deployment of hundreds of gigawatts of clean energy, which is what everyone keeps talking about right now, the bill also ensures that we're producing the energy here in America and then revitalizing our domestic manufacturing base. So one of the first tax credits that I think some people might already be aware of is 48C. That's what we refer to as the Advanced Energy Project Investment Tax Credit. There's a lot of tax credits if folks aren't aware of that already. And so, like I said, DOE is working kind of hand in hand with Treasury to make sure that we can release guidance so a lot of folks can take advantage of some of these tax credits. For 48C in particular, this one kind of targets the manufacturing of like technologies that really are going to help decarbonize our economy, allow us to compete really in the global clean energy race. So this can apply to things like solar panels, heat pumps, electric vehicles. This program is not particularly new, but it did get sort of added scope through IRA. A lot of folks might be familiar with IRA, the American Recovery Act 2009. And so as part of the IRA, it was expanded to include critical minerals processing and then also helping to address industrial greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And so if folks are following this one a little bit closely, there's about $10 billion to expand U.S. manufacturing capacity. And this also creates, like I said earlier, great quality jobs, supplying and recycling clean energy technologies. And then again, to get back to the other point that I was talking about for low and sort of disadvantaged communities, there is a $4 billion carve out to address energy communities as part of 48C. And so we'll touch on that in a second. And then there's another credit that folks might want to be aware of. It's called 45X. So this provides incentive for to help drive down the cost of producing clean energy components and minerals in the U.S. I don't need to spend too much time on this. I don't think the guidance is actually out for this yet, but for folks that might be thinking about manufacturing opportunities, this might be one of those to sort of put on your radar screen. The next slide here does kind of lay out some of those opportunities to really thread the IRA opportunities, some of these tax credits with some of the other programs that also address manufacturing. So the first two, 45X and 48C, which I covered, are all part of the Inflation Reduction Act. And then there's also a couple other programs that you might also want to be aware of related to the bipartisan infrastructure law. Some of these, like Bill 40209, for example, we do have another office in DOE that is really looking to help implement that program, for example. But this is just a quick snapshot of how things can be weaved together. I think for folks that aren't necessarily studying the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act, it's really hard to kind of tease out, which components are really helpful or which ones are most, I would say, critical, I think, to your sort of operations. And so I try to just put some of these opportunities all in one place for you to see. And then we get into clean electricity. That's another sector. So first I covered sort of consumer energy. Second was manufacturing. The last one I think I'm going to cover is just on just clean electricity. This has probably gotten maybe some of the most, I would say, attention because there's a lot of opportunities for some of the tax credits to really help with clean energy deployment. So one of the major power sector provisions in the IRA is the transition to technology neutral investment tax credits and production tax credits for zero emission technologies. So folks might be aware of things like 45, 48. Those just sort of roll off the tip of our tongues, but again, not super helpful for the average person to really understand. And so I think a lot of this is modeled after the existing investment tax credit and production tax credits. So projects can choose, either a 30% investment tax credit in a lot of these cases. Some other things to add is that there are a bunch of other adders as part of this. And so that's one thing that really makes some of this clean energy deployment, I think what our secretary says, she uses the word irresistible. to sort of investment. And so there's bonuses for energy communities, which we'll talk about, for domestic content, which is producing stuff in the US, and then also for wind and solar benefiting low income communities. So there's been some press and coverage in the media as of recent, talking about things like a layer cake is what is being utilized, and that's sort of how we also view this. Again, there's just so much opportunity here to really kind of think through how some of these tax credits can be layered on at DOE. And again, just a helpful slide, just kind of think through some of the production tax credits and investment tax credits. Yeah, 45, 48, 45Y, 48E. Again, it's not super intuitive, but again, I think some of the main takeaways here is that you can get almost like a 70%, what we'll say is sort of like a credit, essentially, to really help deploy clean energy in your communities. And then again, just to focus on labor. So just going back to the clean energy deployment opportunities, the real nexus here is that in order to get the full value of some of these tax incentives, it is going to require that companies follow strong labor standards. Again, this is part of the effort to make sure that we sort of bring everybody along as part of this energy transition. So I mentioned earlier that a lot of the jobs aren't going to require four-year college degrees, but again, there's also some big opportunities here in terms of apprenticeship programs that are shown to result in about a 47% increase in income for females, 30% increase for males, and then the tax incentives are really tied to a lot of these labor standards, and so for companies that don't adhere to some of these standards, you're actually going to lose out at about a 5% sort of bonus there. It actually decreases the amount that you're actually eligible for. And so in order to get to that full 30%, we do require that folks actually adhere to some of these standards. And then lastly, just to talk about energy communities. So on April 4th, DOE Treasury worked with IRS to release a map of energy communities. This is one of those tax bonuses that are eligible for electricity projects located within the energy community. So this is just one definition of energy community. There's also energy communities that are part of that 48C manufacturing tax credit, but most of it is focused on coal and how are we thinking about revitalizing some of these retired coal plants and coal communities as part of this. So we want to make sure that we deliver federal resources to actually revitalize some of America's energy communities. So as part of this, I think folks might have been following this a little bit as well. Maryland, I believe, has a couple coal units that have retired. And so if we're thinking about some of those opportunities for economic revitalization or redevelopment, there is an opportunity for developers to get that 10% adder for clean electricity projects. And then just some tools that might be available for some of these coal retirements. We did release this tool called this coal power plant redevelopment visualization tool. It basically has like a public database and a map, which is going to help enable state, local economic developers, project developers, power plant owners, and other folks to kind of think through with some of those opportunities for coal plant redevelopment and for community reinvestment. So this is kind of where I'll slowly pass it over to Chris and also to Hans here, but I think there's a lot of opportunity to kind of think through how some of the planning dollars that are eligible to states can help you all think through what some of these opportunities might be for some of these coal communities, and at the same time, how can we kind of think through some of the loan program authorities that might exist for energy infrastructure reinvestment. There's also a report that we also recently released called Federal Support Opportunities to Remediate and Redevelop Energy Assets. This report is really looking at things like that, the Loan Program Authority, and also how can you combine that with some of the energy communities tax credits that are also available, and also kind of thinking through what's available for brownfield redevelopment. That's another area that I think we are starting to look into a little bit more. Brownfields are really administered by EPA in the states, who are kind of really thinking about that, but are there some benefits there to be utilizing some of this kind of established maybe some of these legacy polluted areas, for example, or just trying to think through how we can potentially utilize them for energy storage or other clean energy opportunities, and also qualify for things like the Energy Communities Tax Credit bonus. So I think I just gave a lot of information there, but I think I'm going to pass it over to Chris now to kind of talk about sort of what's happening at the state community level.
Well, thank you,
Thank you,
Davey.
Davey.
That was really helpful background. And oh, there's Chris. I was going to buy you a few minutes of time, but Chris, if you're ready to go, please do.
We're ready to dive right in, Chairman. Thank you for, again, the opportunity for us to come and present to you all. And I wanted to follow on to Davey's great overview to dive a little bit deeper into shedding light on a newly formed office here at the Department of Energy that's really intended to support states and local communities through this clean energy transition. Again, just a quick background. My name is Chris Castro. I serve as the Chief of Staff in this newly formed office of SCEP, and I'll shed some light on that here shortly. I'm coming from about a decade on the ground in Orlando, Florida, where I served as the Mayor Buddy Dyer's senior advisor for this work and the director of the Office of Sustainability and Resilience, working with our municipal utility and other IOUs in the region to really advance our transition towards 100% clean energy. And I'm excited to be here with you all today. Just this past week, we were on another call with the Maryland Energy Authority as well, talking through some of the IRA rebates. I'll talk through that at a high level, just so you're aware. But really, I wanted to start out by shedding light that DOE and our investments are directly aligned with President Biden and Vice President Harris's administration's near and long-term climate and clean energy goals. These are the three North Stars that the department and our agencies are all working towards, and that is to reduce our emissions 52% by the year 2030, achieve 100% clean electricity grid by 2035, and continue our trajectory towards those science-based targets of a net zero emissions economy by 2050. And obviously we see these challenges of the climate crisis as tremendous opportunities to really boost our domestic manufacturing, to onshore that supply chain, to create jobs, to enhance the resilience of our communities, and really achieve many of the intended benefits that come with. And for decades, many of the climate activists and advocates have been working hard to meet this magic moment that we're in. And I call it I got to bring some magic from Central Florida up to DC. But we are now seeing that there's over $500 billion invested for climate and clean energy across the federal government. And it's because of these three bills that Davey just mentioned in his prior presentation. Secretary Granholm often talks about these in a really creative way. She says that the bipartisan infrastructure law, really is the backbone of the clean energy economy. It's investing in building clean technology infrastructure. It's investing in our supply chains. It's trying to also ensure that we're increasing the climate resilience of this infrastructure. The CHIPS and Science Act, she calls the brain of the clean energy economy, and it really is trying to double down on bringing about investing in innovation, in our manufacturing capabilities, and again, onshoring the critical materials and minerals and supply chains to really take control of this clean energy economy. Of course, semiconductors, and the whole idea is to invest in our chips, in our semiconductor chips. They're in pretty much every clean energy technology that we can think about, from solar inverters to EVs to electric vehicles to solar panels themselves, and so many more. And so it's critical that we boost that. And then lastly is the Inflation Reduction Act. She calls this the lungs of the clean energy economy that's breathing new life. And over the next decade, we'll focus on investing in the American household to lower energy bills and energy burden, pulling clean technology from kind of the fringes to the mainstream, and doing so in a way that advances environmental justice. And I think we're at a really critical opportunity here. Now, out of the $500 billion, DOE has received about $100 billion of these new investments on top of the annual appropriations. And the secretary often mentions that these dollars have come with a new mission tag. And that's really focused on how do we deploy clean energy in an equitable way to drive impact and transition our economy towards one that's net zero. And really quickly realized that the Department of Energy for the last 46 years has primarily been a research and research and development agency, investing in the 17 national labs that we have, trying to mitigate nuclear proliferation, but also commercialize these clean technologies that are now viable in the marketplace. With this $100 billion, we really needed to think differently about how we were structured. And so Secretary Granholm quickly realigned the Department of Energy to create a new Undersecretary of Infrastructure, what's called S3. And you can see all the changes in gold on this slide. And that new Undersecretary now has 8 program offices that are focused on this equitable deployment mission. You can see you're going to be hearing from 2 of them today, SCEP certainly, and then the Loan Programs Office with Hans. There's also the Grid Deployment Office, which I think was part of your first series, the Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains Office, MESC, and even the Clean Energy Demonstrations Office. These are some newly formed offices just over the last year to year and a half that are really trying to position DOE in a new way and build a new muscle for our department that focuses on deployment. So in SCEP, our mission is to really be the front door for states, tribal governments, and local governments. Our mission is to partner with those institutions and other community organizations to use clean energy as a way to catalyze local economic development, as a way to boost job creation within your community, to attract new investment, and to begin addressing many of the historic pollution and other challenges facing our communities. Now, SCEP manages $16 billion with a B, $1 billion worth of formula and competitive grants. And we also have this mission around technical assistance and providing the states and tribes and local governments with the necessary support in order to be most effective, efficient, and impactful with the dollars that they're getting, right? And so we have a whole mission here in SCEP around providing technical assistance, and I'll get into that shortly. Hopefully, you all have already been well briefed on Justice 40 and the importance of our mission to ensure that 40% of the overall benefits of these federal investments flow to our disadvantaged communities that have been marginalized, underserved, and overburdened by pollution for far too long. President Biden, in his first couple of days in office, signed the historic Executive Order 14008, and that established Justice 40. Good news is that there has been a lot of work to identify what parts of our community count towards this investment. And I want to point you to the climate and economic screening tool, economic justice screening tool known as CJUS, that really identifies tracts that are overburdened and underserved within our communities, and marks them as kind of historically disadvantaged and counts towards this Justice 40 effort. Here within SCEP, our core priority is equitable deployment. So within our program design, everything from the nonprofit funding to the public school dollars and others are really focused on how do we ensure outcomes are flowing to those that have been historically disadvantaged. I always like a good org chart to help center kind of how these new offices are created. And so I think this gives you a good overview. Basically, we have 5 key pillars within the Office of State and Community Energy Program. And 2 of the 5 actually are kind of foundational programs that have been part of DOE for the last 40 plus years. You probably are aware of the Weatherization Assistance Program and the State Energy Program. Of course, SCP, State Energy Program, funds the state of Maryland and the Maryland Energy Authority every single year, and has over the last 40 years. And the goal of those dollars are providing flexible resources to the states to help you all with energy security, investments in energy efficiency and renewables for your own operations, but also sub-granting dollars for communities, for tribes, and other local governments in order to help, help them through their clean energy transition. So we're excited that when the bipartisan infrastructure law came, it really plussed up these existing programs. Weatherization now has $3.5 billion, and we anticipate over 500,000 households being weatherized just from the bill plus up dollars across the country. In addition, the state energy program, which annually has about $66 to $70 million annually, got up $500 million plus up. And on top of the SEP dollars, you all probably know that there's also new revolving loan grants to capitalize new revolving loan funds at the state levels and create new low-cost capital pools that could be relent to local governments, to small businesses, and to nonprofits to also make these clean energy improvements. We also have the community energy programs that started to enable dollars to flow into local governments and community serving institutions. Of course, our public school, $500 million for public schools, it's called Renew America's Schools Grant, is the first time ever that DOE has been able to invest in local education agencies and school districts to help them reduce their energy burden and improve indoor environmental quality for teachers and students. Super excited about those grants, as well as those for nonprofit 501c3s, which in just a couple of days, we'll see an announcement open up for funding there. We're also excited about workforce development and training and see that there's a tremendous amount of opportunity here for the states to start to get you all's residents prepared and contractors prepared to take advantage of all of these tax credits and the rebates that are going to start to flow. The fourth pillar that you see there is really consumer focused, and it's where all of the Inflation Reduction Act home energy rebates landed. And the last pillar is really around community engagement and some of the work that we're doing to support fossil transition and IIJA communities through this process. Running through just a couple of other slides, I wanted to highlight some of these grants I've quickly mentioned. So when I first got here in July of 2022, SCEP really was only thinking about the bipartisan infrastructure law. There was $6 billion within this office. And as you can see there, we talked about most of that, but it's workforce dollars, it's new capital dollars, of course, funds that flow to schools and the like. I think one of the most exciting grants that we're managing out of the community energy pillar is this EECBG, Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grants. This is going to flow to over 2,700 communities, all 50 states, 5 territories, 1,800 plus cities, 744 tribal governments, both federally and state recognized tribes, are going to get formula allocations. So Congress has already set out how that formula is going to flow. 98% of the dollars are going to flow through the formula. And then there's 2% of the dollars that are available for competitive grants only for smaller city and county governments that were not eligible for the original formula. So, most of the larger municipalities and large counties based on population will get direct formula, but there's a considerable amount that will not. And so I wanted to underscore there are 2 ways for those communities to benefit. One is this federal competitive grant I just talked about, which has already been enabled. The funding announcement was released about a month ago, and proposals are due here in just a few weeks in early June for the competitive grants. In addition, though, each state, including the state of Maryland, is required by law to subgrant 60% of your EECBG dollars to smaller city and county and tribal governments that also did not get a direct formula from DOE. So again, those smaller city and counties, they have 2 bites at the apple. One, the federal competitive grant, and secondly, when you all enable the sub-grant that they can apply to. We're really excited about EECBG because it is the most flexible grant that we have coming out of the Department of Energy. 15 different eligible uses. It can hire consultants to do transition planning. It can actually purchase equipment. And I will say that we now have a new process of enabling vouchers for both equipment and technical assistance. Instead of you managing a federal grant, you can go through a voucher process that's much more streamlined and will ultimately help you get to the same end state that you were aiming for. So EECBG is great. The other big dollars flowing through the states are going to be your training and workforce development dollars. There's $260 million within SCEP, but 240 of it actually goes to you all as the state and the state energy office. That includes this training for residential energy contractors and the energy auditor training program. Both of those are intended to flow through the states, and you all work with higher ed and community colleges and other nonprofit groups to facilitate that type of training. But it will be, flowing through you all. So important to note. A few months after me taking this role in July, come October, the Inflation Reduction Act gets passed. And, there was question about what SCEP would be managing. And sure enough, we ended up finding out that 4 of the IRA provisions that came to DOE will be managed by SCEP. And that includes upwards of $10 billion worth of resources. The 2 big kahunas are the home energy rebates, the 2 rebates that are broken out. And then we have the $200 million on the contractor training and $1 billion to support states and local governments with code authority to adopt the latest building energy codes and the zero energy provisions, as well as stretch codes and standards for existing buildings. We're pretty excited about that. I know that there's a lot of question about the home energy rebates. So just really quickly, we have some important goals, and we see this almost in a 3-pronged approach. First, we need to train the workforce to ensure that they know how to install things like heat pump and heat pump water heaters. There's a new competency, there are new skills that plumbers and HVAC technicians must take in order to install these things properly. Next, we see the rebate programs as kind of complementary programs to further enhance bill savings and lower energy burden in households. And finally, we see the codes as a form of market transformation to start to lock in these codes and standards so that benefits can flow well into the future. And so we have a major work ahead of us. But ultimately, it's important to note that the $8.8 billion in the home energy rebates really are 2 different programs. You have the home efficiency rebates, what we call HOMES, and then you have the home electrification and appliance rebates, what we call HERE. Now, both of those have different components and provisions, but in short, they provide households with, a subsidy at the point of sale that helps them to reduce the overall cost, both for equipment and installation for all types of different appliances. And I'll quickly just mention which types. I will point that the state of Maryland is going to get $137 million from both of these programs combined to really roll out a rebate program that you all will administer. And for the sake of time, I'm going to move us forward, but this does give you a little snapshot of the differences between the HERE and the HOMES rebate programs and what is eligible and how much a household may or may not be able to get. And regarding eligible equipment and housing types, really these rebates are eligible for single and multifamily, renters and owners, as well as new construction and existing properties. So across the board, no matter what your housing situation is, you can benefit from these new rebates. And there are a wide variety of different equipment, everything from upgrading your wiring and your electrical service to your home to replacing your cooktop and your washer and dryer, as well as, of course, your HVAC and water heaters. So a lot of eligible equipment and housing types. I'm rounding third base just to fill you in on the technical assistance initiatives that we have going on. And all that to say is, in addition to the $16 billion in grants that we are managing, there's also this mission, like I talked about, to support those entities, states, tribes, local governments, community orgs, with how to properly administer those dollars. And so we have a number of technical assistance providers that we work with, whether it's our national labs, whether it's other DOE program offices, and it includes everything from supporting the states with transmission and distribution planning for your grid, to the state energy security plans and working with our CSER office to support the states with that process, to a wide variety of other things. We even have cohorts for things like correctional facilities and wastewater treatment plants, and getting operators of those unique space types to come together, share best practices, and learn how to move it forward. Throughout these engagements, we end up uncovering real needs from our states and our communities that we work with. And some of those turn into popular tools, universal tools that could be used across the country. And I wanted to highlight 2 of those tools. One is the SLOPE platform, which provides state and local planning for energy, and really integrates about 50 different data sources and allows you to kind of look and forecast out your future clean energy transition. And this is especially helpful for those communities that have never even started this process of looking at energy as a core resource for their future economy. The second tool is LEAD, and that's the low income energy affordability data. This is phenomenal. Another web-based tool that integrates housing and energy characteristics together and really helps to uncover parts of our community that are in most burden and that we should be trying to target these dollars to have the greatest impact. Now, technical assistance often is siloed by a program. So the state energy program has TA dollars that we carve out so that we can provide the states with specific training and support. But there's also broad-based technical assistance that communities are coming to us with, just that aren't necessarily technology specific. And as SCEP, being a kind of a technology agnostic office, we're now in the process of also lifting up a new Office of Community Engagement. This is a really exciting new muscle that DOE is starting to flex on figuring out, what does a ground game look like? How do we support communities and some of the community-based organizations that are already doing this work? And how do we also create a conduit to connect to the various other program offices that have support, that have resources for these communities as well? One of the examples of this is what's called Communities Leap. This is an effort that 8 offices at DOE came together to jointly fund and support 24 communities. These are fossil transition communities and environmental justice communities with doing deep transition planning towards clean energy. So tapping into our national labs and the supercomputers at NREL and really doing forecasting and scenario planning of how, what opportunities they have to look forward to. And Davey also mentioned our real focus on these energy communities and the efforts around trying to support coal and power plant communities through their transition. Early on in this administration, President Biden, as part of that 14008 executive order, also created this new interagency working group on coal plant and economic revitalization. We call it the Energy Communities IWG, or Interagency Working Group. This now has 11 federal government agencies working to coordinate technical assistance and funding to these energy communities in a whole of government approach, right? So it's not just DOE approaching this community, but it's also the Department of Commerce and FEMA and HUD and EPA and DOT and others at the table trying to understand how we can support them through and their economy through this transition to ensure that they don't just, you know, die on the vine, so to speak. There is a brand new report that's been put out after the last 2 years of progress, and it really highlights a unique new strategy around deploying rapid response teams, actually individuals from our agencies going into these communities for a dedicated amount of time, doing listening sessions, engaging grassroots organizations, and helping them develop a plan for the types of funding and TA across Bill and IRA that they can tap into and really accelerate their work. Energycommunities.gov is a specific website for that effort, and encourage you all to check that out. And in closing, just how to stay connected. There's so much information here, and I'm just scratching the surface for you. I want to make sure that you are aware. If you go to energy.gov/BIL, you can sign up to get regular updates from, about all of these programs that are rolling out. And I also encourage you to sign up to our newsletter, the State and Local Spotlight. It comes out the last week of every month and really targets all of the different place-based clean energy programs that you can take advantage of. With that, Chairman, I will turn it back over to you and yield back my time. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you and Davey. This has ended up being a masterclass in a lot of the federal funding opportunities. And it's interesting to see that every one of these opportunities, or almost every one, has a B after the number as opposed to an M. So both of you were very plain speaking and answered a lot of my questions. And that presentation was terrific. But it's not over yet. We have one more speaker from the Department of Energy, somebody that some of us are familiar with. That's Hans Reimer. He is now a senior consultant with the DOE's Loan Program Office. But many of us here inside the Beltway and in Metro Washington, D.C. are familiar with Hans because he was a council member on the Montgomery County Council for about a dozen years before he transitioned to the federal government, where he works with state and private sector applicants as they begin to apply for this funding. So, Hans, it's very good to see you again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm really glad to be here. That was two fantastic presentations from my colleagues. They've set the bar really high, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity to share more about what we're working on at the Loan Programs Office, where I'm working now. So I'm going to try to share my screen here. Okay, I think I need to be provided with the sharing authority.
Oh, well, we'll get you that in one moment.
All right, and I can sort of get going while we're waiting. I'm going to talk a little bit about our loan program office authorities and some of the programs that we have. Going to touch on some of the main categories of for applications under our loan authority, and then shift a little bit into the issue of supporting the deployment of virtual power plants and customer-owned assets. Okay, so we've got the authority now. All right. So I think you can, are you able to see that?
Not yet. You do have control for screen sharing, but it's not on the screen just yet.
Okay.
I can see it.
Oh, there it is. It's up.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have authority at the Loan Programs Office. We're a division at Department of Energy that has been providing loan guarantees for many years. Famously provided a loan to Tesla for its first manufacturing plant for sedans. We've been at the forefront of the clean energy revolution for a very long time. And with the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act, have been granted significant new authority to grant different kinds of loans or loans to different kinds of projects, as well as significant new, financial, the amount of loans that we can grant. So the four main programs that we are working through are innovative clean energy, the innovative supply chain. So those are new deployment of, a manufacturing plant for batteries or for solar or for a new technology that is going to scale. Then we have a program called the State Energy Financing Institutions, which is really projects that states want to support. And we have the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment, which is about upgrading, modernizing energy infrastructure. So you've heard some fantastic presentations about resources that are available through tax credits and through various grant programs. I think the big picture is there's a lot of money that's available for projects in Maryland, and it's a really good time to invest in your capacity, your staff capability to be able to devise projects and take advantage of the significant federal resources that are available to think big about the opportunities that are ahead and organize those resources to achieve your goals. The legislature's recent action in Maryland with the Climate Solutions Now legislation has set some big goals, for example, around building decarbonization and gradually shifting the building sector so that it reduces emissions. With the Loan Programs Office, SCEP, other parts of DOE can really provide a lot of resources to help you achieve that goal that the state has set. So, we know with electrification, which is on the rise, there's going to be a significant increase in utilization or electricity needs. And so it's a great time for collaboration across government sectors with the private sector on how to achieve that in a way that is, best for the consumer. So projects that come to LPO for loans, there's a few requirements for those projects. Obviously, they have to be located in the United States. They have to be energy related. They have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They have to have a reasonable prospect of repayment. So other parts of DOE can provide grants, but we provide loans, and our loans, we only provide a loan if we think there's a high chance that it will be repaid. We have community benefits plans that are required as part of our loans, and a loan cannot commingle other federal grant sources. Now, you can stack a loan on top of tax credits or rebates potentially, but you can't use another federally appropriated funding source as repayment to a loan. So that's a factor that comes up. But we have largely private sector applicants that are implementing projects that achieve public good, public goals. And these are the kind of terms that they will approach us for. Here's a dashboard showing the different kinds of technologies that we are funding, where we're providing loan guarantees. We have a big new emphasis on industrial decarbonization, critical minerals. There's a lot of categories that projects will come to us for, vehicles and so forth. Now, the first big category, I'm going to just really provide a high-level overview. We just saw a great map from SCEP about power plants. That's an example of energy infrastructure, obviously. The first big project category for us is called Section 1706. And this is a loan authority. We've got $250 billion that Congress has devoted to, or dedicated to, providing guarantees for projects that retool, that repower, repurpose, or replace energy infrastructure. So that can mean a lot of things. And the next slide, I'm going to provide some potential project examples, but this is the single biggest category. And I think you'll probably see it's worth some in-depth exploration as to how projects in Maryland could access these funds to achieve the goals that you have at the PSC and that the state has adopted. So, for example, some of those projects could be retooling, repowering, purposing a power plant to deploy renewable energy, to use the infrastructure to support distributed energy, the installation or the aggregation of customer-owned equipment into virtual power plants or other equipment into virtual power plants. Transmission interconnection, that's a big one. New manufacturing facilities for clean energy products, of course, nuclear. There's a lot of different kinds of projects that will fit under Section 1706. And again, this is our single biggest authority. So I'm certain that you'll find lots of opportunities when you're sitting down to figure out how to upgrade and support the upgrading of that equipment. Another big category for us now is state energy financing institutions, or SEFIs. So historically, as I mentioned, we funded projects where a company was coming to us with a new technology, or they couldn't get an affordable loan. They had an equity investment piece, they needed a commercial loan, it was too expensive, or they couldn't even get one, and they would come to LPO. We always had requirement that you had to have a novel technology that had not been deployed substantially in the marketplace. With the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law, we're now able to back projects that states are supporting, even if they're deploying technologies that are established. So, for example, a portfolio strategy around solar, today, it might not have a component to it that is a new and untested technology, but if the state is supporting that kind of a project, those projects can come seeking a loan guarantee from us. So a few examples of the kinds of projects that we might see. Okay, sorry, skipping through this slide. Are loans to commercial multifamily portfolios for energy projects. Again, I mentioned earlier the Climate Solutions Now Act and the Building Energy Performance Standards, and making financing that is lower cost available to those building owners to help support their investments and the equipment that they're going to need and the upgrades that they're going to need to achieve those requirements. Loans to manufacturers for essentially clean technology to decarbonize different sectors of the economy. Community energy projects at a portfolio scale, or community solar, virtual power plant aggregation. Just to take a quick step back, our projects generally want to be more than $100 million. So that's because of the cost of the loan, essentially. And so applicants see that it begins to pencil out once you get above $100 million, And of course, the higher you go, the more advantage there will be. And there's no ceiling on the amount of guarantee that we can provide. We announced a few weeks ago a $3 billion loan guarantee to Sunnova for its residential solar installation strategy. Projects can come to us under the state energy financing institution category if they have support from a state energy financing institution. So what would that be? There's a lot of different examples that are potentially what we call CEFIs. Could be a housing finance agency, it could be an economic development authority, a clean energy center, an energy administration. These are public or quasi-public agencies that were created to support energy projects. And likely any of those kinds of organizations that I mentioned would qualify. So when one of those entities wants to support a project, if they provide meaningful support to the project, then the project can approach us for a loan guarantee. Now, I've mentioned a few examples of some of the projects continuing on that theme. Affordable financing, that's something we're really excited about, in conversation with states about how to help customers basically access the equipment they need or pay for the costs of additional installations to the extent that costs are going to exceed the rebates, which, for a whole home project or even, a partial home project, you're potentially you can do a lot more than what the rebates will necessarily fund. The rebates are going to fund a piece. If you wanted to go further, you would need to pay additionally. A whole home project could be $50,000. So how will the state be able to help consumers achieve those kinds of investments at an affordable rate? So a lot of states are thinking about how to create lower cost loans using the Loan Programs Office so that contractors and residential customers, for example, can get an affordable loan for the installation. In terms of what the scale is that's necessary, a $100 million loan doesn't have to be taken out all at once. It can be a multi-year draw. So a program that was supporting $10,000 per home with 2,000 homes a year over 5 years would get you there. So it's a scale that is achievable when you're operating at a state level. And there's a lot of ways that it could be done. But whether that's a utility on bill program or a green bank backed program or a purely private company, our loan guarantee can be helpful in getting assets behind the meter and available to be aggregated. In a sector where you don't have the ability to get to $100 million and above, there is also the option of multi-state approaches. So whether that's the low-cost financing for consumers or an industrial decarbonization program, you can look around the region, for example, and find similarly aligned needs, and a project could combine from different states to come in for financing. So there's a lot of different options that are available for projects that will help you achieve your goals. A few components of the loan guarantees themselves. As I mentioned, we don't have a minimum or a maximum size, but the costs tend to pencil out a lot better once you get above $100 million. We will only provide a guarantee for 80% at most of the project cost, but generally it'll even be a little less. So the project needs to have other sources of financing. They need to have equity. We can't be the only source. A project could borrow from the federal finance bank, and we can guarantee that, or a project can have a loan guarantee from a commercial bank, and we can guarantee that. But generally, the rate that we offer is the rate of the U.S. Treasury note at the time of the draw plus 3/8, and then there is a risk-based charge and various fees that are associated with it. So it's a significant resource available to projects that states want to support or that come in directly. These loan terms apply to all the different programs, whether that's 1706, which is the energy infrastructure, or projects that states might support in different categories. So shifting gears a little bit, one of the big policy priority areas for the Department of Energy is virtual power plants, and we are working with states now on helping devise approaches and support their efforts to get more customer assets behind the meter. Because as we're looking down the road, I think we're all seeing that the move to electrify everything is going to lead to significant increase in electricity needs. And it's going to be challenging to build to match that rising need in the traditional way. And it's not necessary. So there's a growing awareness. A lot of studies have been recently released. We're all looking closely at the Brattle study, came out a few weeks ago, demonstrating that a virtual power plant model will be a far more affordable way to meet the rising need for electricity. Brattle identifies a savings, in the tens of billions of dollars to the utility sector for making capacity investments through virtual power plants and distributed energy resources, with additional societal benefits on top of that. So, we're very interested in supporting projects that are looking to get more assets to customers behind the meter, and the rebate program will be a big factor there. But a lot of customers will need will have additional expenses to make the kind of changes that they'll need to make. So that we have an upcoming, what we call a liftoff report, and a liftoff report is an analysis of a sector or a technology, and we have one coming soon on virtual power plants, and so we'll send that to you at the time. But there are some states that are looking at task forces. Texas has one. The PSC there has one, to bring the stakeholders together and really kind of take a deeper dive on the numbers and figure out how that might fit there. So to sum it all up, we've got a really big program with $250 billion in loan guarantee authority available under Section 1706. Utilities can access that. They can combine distributed energy resources into retooling, modernizing a power plant. There's a lot of flexibility in that program. Projects that states support, we've got a significant financial authority to provide guarantees for projects that states are supporting, and there's a lot of different ways for states to participate in those projects. That's the State Energy Financing Institution pathway. And in general, we're very interested in supporting strategies to get more behind the meter assets that can reduce costs and improve reliability and reduce emissions. So I'll turn it back to you now, Mr. Chair, and appreciate your invitation to us. I'm going to put a link into the chat for our Title 17 guidance, which was just released a few days ago. And it is the kind of, it provides all the information that an applicant would want to know about any of these different pathways into a loan guarantee. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hans, as well. That's a very informative presentation. Yourself and Jigar Shah, who leads the LPO, obviously have hundreds of billions of dollars more to make in investments that align not only with the administration's policies, but with the policies of the state of Maryland. With all this background that we've just heard over the past hour and a half, I would open it up to my colleagues to see if they have any questions for Chris, Davey, or Hans at this point. And if not, we'll go into a general session where any participant here could ask.
Chairman, are you, did you turn it over to commissioners for questions? I kind of lost the sound a bit.
Yes, Commissioner, do you have a question? Commissioner Bubar?
I do. Can people hear me?
You're breaking up a bit, but give it a go.
Okay, I'm going to turn my video off, see if that helps. Thank you, everybody. These were incredibly informative presentations. Thank you. So I'll I'll start with Hans, just as some follow-up questions. And great, Hans, it's so great to see you. Thank you. And it's really exciting what you're doing at Department of Energy. So thank you. On the Section 1706 projects, generally, who are the applicants? Trying to understand, sorting out a little bit, which of these are for state agencies to be paying attention to, which are for the utilities, which we regulate. And so I was trying to understand for the Section 1706, generally, who have the applicants been, or who would you anticipate them being?
Thank you, Patty. Great question. Generally speaking, but that program is pretty wide open, and utilities can apply. A lot of companies are also applying if they invest, if they purchase a former facility. So you'll see that across a spectrum, essentially. I don't know if I can get you more information about what applications we have received to date. That'll help you kind of sort through that. But I also want to suggest you might, as a commission, want to explore a deeper dive on 1706, because there's a lot there, and you got a great presentation from SCEP about the power plant mapping that they have, and there's resources that they have available that can be blended potentially with the financing from LPO. So it just depends. And given the size of that program, I think it might be useful to really kind of go deep there on 1706. It's the $250 billion program, and there can be a variety of applicants that would seek to take advantage of that.
Okay, thank you. I think that's good advice. And then I just one follow-up question. You went a little bit through the terms of the loan, the 0.375. I don't have a strong financial background, so to speak, but can you just give some insight as to how that compares to what people would get if they just went out on the standard market?
Well, it's typically going to be less. The rate that a bank would give a project is going to depend a lot on how risky a project is. But
and the terms you went through are terms for the project, so risk does not kind of factor into what the terms would be.
Well, we have a risk-based adjustment, but yeah, I mean, a project is going to be able to get a significantly more affordable loan through LPO than they would be able to get from a bank. So, once you get to scale, in a lot of categories. Now, there are plenty of areas where the banks are they're willing to make loans at a more affordable rate, and those instances, projects won't see much advantage of coming to us. So it just kind of depends.
Okay, all right. Chairman, I have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
No, please proceed, Commissioner.
Okay, this might be for Davey. So on just a couple questions on the weather assistance program. You talk about the $3.5 billion. Is that money flowing how it always did in terms of kind of flowing to the states, or how does it flow, and how does it get decided? Is that are you relying on how it had typically been done in the past, or is there changes in that methodology?
Correct, Commissioner. It's essentially using the existing process of flowing the weatherization dollars through the states to the community action agencies that are, that you all have designated throughout your state, and essentially just kind of plussing up on the dollars. There is still the kind of per home restriction on the amount that we could spend per home on the weatherization. But I will say that in addition to your traditional weatherization dollars, there are two additional competitive grants, one of which will be coming out shortly that you should be aware of. One is called the Weatherization Assistance Program Enhancement and Innovation Grants. We call it E&I grants. These have the ability of the community action agencies, the states, and other nonprofits to apply for kind of innovation projects that go beyond your traditional weatherization improvements. And there's also another grant called Sustainable Energy Resource for Consumers. and is just another competitive a pot for thinking more neighborhood scale type improvements as well. Both of those additional WAP grants are competitive grants, so they won't flow through a formula. They will be open for competitive proposals. And the E&I grant, if I'm not mistaken, will be coming out next month, the next round of E&I grants. So sometime in mid to late June, keep an eye out. And the funding announcement will open up for, again, the state and the community action agencies within that state to be able to apply to do kind of weatherization plus type projects.
Okay, thank you. I don't know who this question, maybe either Chris or Davey, but several of you talked about apprenticeships and training of the workforce, which are, of course, very admirable and necessary goals. Does DOE provide any, guidance or assistance on exactly what an apprenticeship program should look like, or, training of the workforce, or is that going to be, is the entity that's receiving the money responsible for, kind of deciding what an apprenticeship program might look like?
Davey, that might be a good question for you on the energy job side of the house.
Yeah, that I'm actually not sure. I don't think I'm unfortunately not expert on that, but I think I can definitely follow up with our energy jobs team there, and I can probably get you an answer. Unfortunately, sorry, I don't have an answer right away.
Okay. And then I think I just have one last question. How are the Justice 40 goals tracked? So, there's these maps that were shown in terms of, where the communities that, might be the most beneficial to receive funds are. But I was just wondering, is there an entity in DOE that's keeping track of, whether the 40% goal is being met, and how's that being tracked?
So let me just start by mentioning that the Justice 40 is 40% of the overall benefits. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to take, let's say it's $100 and carve out just 40 to go to these historically disadvantaged communities, because there are other aspects of benefits from job creation and investment, entrepreneurship, et cetera, that could flow from a given project. One of the ways that DOE is incorporating J40 into these solicitations is through what's called the Community Benefit Plan mechanism. And so all of the competitive funding solicitations coming out from Bill and IRA will require that that the applicants pull together a community benefit plan. And that plan has several components that they have to address, including, how are they going to ensure prevailing wages for the workforce that's working on these projects? How are, benefits essentially going to flow to these communities, and how are they kind of carving out certain low income or other disadvantaged communities to receive those benefits. So part of it is developing the plan, the community benefit plan. And then secondly, in the monitoring and reporting of those dollars, that's going to be part of the reporting process and the metrics that essentially we're trying to capture from each one of these awards.
Okay. Okay, I think this will be my last question. It's probably for Chris. Do you have any insights from working with other states that you might want to provide advice to Maryland in terms of, organizational structures or coordination within states that you've seen, kind of has worked well? Because, you have your, DHCD type programs, and you have, your energy programs. And then of course you have the regulators, PSC. So it's just a lot of different entities that, if they work together, it might be a little bit more efficient. I was just wondering if you had any states that had maybe cracked that code a bit, or any insights on an organizational structure that might work better than others.
Yeah, certainly welcome Davey and Hans to shed light onto this. But, one thing that we've seen as a best practice is, states that hire up an infrastructure coordinator for the state that's really tracking all of the, relevant bill and IRA related funding. And that entity kind of creating a working group of the various, state agencies that play a role, whether it's the Department of Environmental Protection, the Energy Authority, obviously the Health and Human Services type group, and PSC being part of that as well. I mean, I think that there's a number of entities, and so we have seen the infrastructure coordinator at the states play an important convening role to, you know, ensure that they're fostering collaboration and partnerships amongst these agencies. And I think that there's a real opportunity here to actually be able to braid and stack some of these resources. As an example, a lot of the resources coming from SCEP flow to the Maryland Energy Authority, but there's also, you know, essentially resources coming from EPA that will be supporting climate pollution reduction grants and even the greenhouse gas reduction funding, right, that's coming out, and that may flow to a different agency. And so to the ability for, you know, an infrastructure coordinator to be able to develop a working group of these agencies and make sure that we're all tracking the various opportunities and collaborating on proposals, that has certainly been a best practice we're trying to encourage others to replicate.
That's very helpful.
Yeah, I think I'll add, you know, just anecdotally, I think we've seen a lot of different agencies within states coming to talk to us, and we're finding that maybe how Chris just alluded to, the state offices might not really know what's going on in terms of the state energy office alignment with the economic development office, with the environmental office. And I think every one of those offices might be tracking different components of the bipartisan infrastructure law or the Inflation Reduction Act funding. And so I think what we're trying to do a little bit better on our side is trying to be a little bit more proactive in our outreach to folks and really letting them know that here are some of these opportunities that Chris was just saying we want to be able to braid somehow together, because if this is not your full-time job, there's no way you're going to be able to keep track of all the different funding announcements that are going out, either from DOE, EPA, USDA. Those are just 3 example agencies that all have some component of energy or clean energy related funding that's going out the door right now. And so how do we actually get all those programs to work together, and sort of what niche are we also trying to fill from a federal government perspective in order to make sure that all the states have the planning resources that they need, and that you all have the tools also to kind of think through some of these problems, like at a regional level, as we're thinking through energy, community reinvestment, those sort of decisions. Chris was talking about the coal and power plant communities interagency working group. They're establishing more of a regional strategy there. And I think that's something that we're starting to encourage a little bit more when we talk to states, is have a little bit more of a regional perspective as some of these opportunities might cross state boundaries. If we're thinking about coal redevelopment, how are we going to think about the workforce? Where's that workforce going to be coming from, depending on the technology or the clean energy technology that you want to be maybe thinking about looking to develop. And so whether or not that's going to be solar, hydrogen potentially, you know, what are all those opportunities? So I think I'll just point that out. But you know, there's no state, I don't think, that really just jumps out there and we can say that, oh, they're doing a really great job. I think we want to be able to try to help everybody, but even on our side, we're desperately trying to get ourselves in order to be most helpful to you all.
We did have the opportunity on Friday last week to present a version of this. So it was not quite as extensive. It was to a Maryland federal investment team that Deputy Chief of Staff Shana Hernandez organized, and it was a cross-agency table. And that's the model. I think you asked the right question, Commissioner. How do we bring the stakeholders together, the agencies together in the state, but eventually including private sector organizations, and have everybody working together towards the priority goals that the state has adopted. And it starts with I think the public sector and the agencies sitting down and starting to work together and developing that system and that process. So I think you'll play an important role in that from the commission, and certainly glad to be here today to help.
Thank you. Those were very helpful. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Bubar. I see Commissioner Linton has an open mic. Commissioner, do you have a question?
No, I did not, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Bubar actually answered some of the questions that I had, so thank you.
She had a lot of good questions, and the fellows from DOE had a lot of good answers. Well, on behalf of the five commissioners, we'd like to thank the folks from Policy, LPO, and SCEP for joining us today. So thank you, Chris, Davey, and Hans. At this point, the commissioners will leave the room, but you'll still have about 30 minutes left. Joey Chen, who is one of the senior advisors at the commission, will take the reins from here. And again, thank you to our colleagues from DOE. This was a very, very informative program today. So Mr. Chen, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to thank our commissioners for joining us today for this very, very excellent, informative presentation. I will continue to talk and maybe speak rather slowly a little bit just to give them time to make a graceful exit. I want to thank everybody for bearing with us as we got off to a little bit of a shaky start with some technical issues. And as a result of that, we were delayed in getting started this this afternoon. And so I just want to make sure that I would give folks here remaining in the room with us a good opportunity to ask our excellent speakers questions that they have. And so if we run a little bit after 3, that would be okay, provided that our speakers are still available with us. So with this, I will open the floor to folks. Let me just mention that we weren't able to connect to a live streaming for this presentation, but we have been recording this meeting. So this recording will be shared once the session is done. We will post this to our YouTube channel, the Commission's YouTube channel. All right, so I will now open the floor to folks who have questions for our speakers. I just want to point out that at the bottom row of WebEx on your screen, you should see a series of buttons. One of them is the little convenient hand button. If you would please use that to raise your hand, that way it pops up on my screen and lets me know that there is a queue that is running. So with that, I will pause and just open the floor for questions for our speakers. Okay, we'll start with Mr. Phillips.
Yes, how you doing? You guys hear me double, right? I'm sorry.
No, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. One of the things that I'm interested in is, in the past, historically, we have made this big investments to investors, and sometimes when they get to the end, when we look at the Porter analysis, the entry stat entry versus exit strategy. Sometimes the taxpayer is left holding the bag from either decommissioning plan or people go bankrupt. What things are in place to make sure that that doesn't happen as these investors come in and I guess the taxpayers are not left holding the bag?
Hans, that might be something on your end regarding kind of how LPO's authority can support that. I mean, a lot of our funds, just to mention, really do flow to the states, tribes, local governments, and community serving institutions, and ultimately are focused on deploying energy efficiency, renewables, and sustainable transportation infrastructure. As it relates to kind of more power generation and transmission infrastructure and the like, I think that might be something that's more focused on the finance side, or kind of maybe the 1706 type authority, Hans.
Sure. Well, we have a very rigorous process to assess projects and determine whether or to what extent we're willing to provide a loan guarantee. And we have to be repaid. We don't have the statutory authority to provide a guarantee to a project that we don't believe has a very strong ability to repay. So, we do get repaid, and that is it's just an essential piece of how we approach our projects. And at the same time, we're there as an entity to assist the private sector in helping private sector entrepreneurs and companies push the boundaries of what's possible and to accelerate the transition and to improve the quality of life. So we're kind of in that area in between. We have to be repaid, and we have hundreds of staff who perform incredible diligence on applications with industry expertise. And, we are, the Loan Programs Office is a very substantial institution with, again, folks with expertise from different sectors, whether that's batteries or vehicles or nuclear. And so they work across, in a team environment, and there's a high level of diligence and accountability for any project. Thank you.
I think I'll also add there, I was actually just looking at this yesterday, surprisingly enough. I think what other elements I think you're talking about, if I'm thinking about this correctly, is on financial assurance. And I think we're looking at just, other state policies that actually mandate financial assurance for, decommissioning. And this is particularly in solar. I'm going to try to find this article and I'll put it in the chat. But I think just thinking across the board, I think only about 15 or so states actually have solar decommissioning policies in place. And so, I think as we're thinking about from a larger federal government perspective for a lot of our projects, we want to make sure that taxpayers aren't actually held liable at the end of the day for, projects that eventually go bankrupt, for example, and then taxpayers are, and at the end of the day, responsible for cleaning that up. I think we've seen that before in the offshore oil and gas space. We've seen it before in onshore, oil and gas as well, given low oil prices and other things like that. And so I think what I want to do is share this article, and maybe that might get, maybe some cogs going there. I'm actually not too familiar with sort of where Maryland is at in terms of, any sort of decommissioning policies, but I think there are some examples that we have in this report that do talk about maybe some other states that do have, decommissioning plans required by either federal or state policy, or financial assurance is also required by federal or state policy. I think some of it is modeled off of what federal government does for the Bureau of Land Management, again, for things like oil and gas decommissioning.
Great, thank you for the responses. We will turn to Michael McMillan. We can't hear you.
You have to unmute in order for that to work, sir. I wanted to ask a question, and I'm not sure if Chris or Davey, if it's too tactical, but on the Justice 40 communities, I've talked to a few different agencies now in Colorado and Rhode Island particularly, and they have some concern, and I think you may have answered part of it with the community benefit put forward there. When they look at a tract that's within those Justice 40 communities, is there a confidence that within that tract they can offer incentives to the folks there without having too high a level of free ridership, in that there could be different income levels within a particular tract? It seems like a pretty big concern I've heard from several CEFIs and state agencies, and I think the commission may ultimately want to know, the confidence in those tracts, or if we should not try to use them in that manner. And I would just wanted to see if you guys had any thoughts on that. Thank you for the time.
I can try to maybe address this maybe from a different angle. So I know that there's a lot of different maps that are out there right now. And I think part of it is trying to find the map that maybe does what it is that you might actually want to do. So earlier we were referencing the energy communities map, which I think is a little bit different, right, than maybe what you might be trying to get at, because there is an element there, right, that does tie Justice 40 to that, and trying to think through, these top 25 coal communities and also these other energy communities that are burdened by coal or power plant closure as well. And then also there's another piece that's part of the IRA for that, which also takes into consideration fossil fuel employment. But I just want to make sure that you are specifically looking at only Justice 40 and maybe how that aligns with the CGES tool. I think Chris might have been talking about earlier.
Yeah, I think CGES tool is the one most of them are asking about.
Yeah, I think we should probably go back to our Office of Economic Impact and Diversity to get you a more pointed response here. Ultimately, that, there is a concern around, you know, certain households maybe not meeting the eligibility that makes a particular census designated as Justice 40, and whether there's a free ridership there. There's been a conversation about that within multifamily housing as well, and whether it counts towards, let's say, a Justice 40 carve out or whatnot for a particular program. Some states are thinking about the rebate dollars that are going to flow to them and actually just making them a low income program versus a low and moderate income program. And so there's talks about how to use categorical eligibility for households if they're already participating in weatherization, if they're already participating in LIHEAP or SNAP EBT, then they're also eligible for these types of rebates at this level, right? And so part of the guidance, by the way, for the rebates that will speak to that point will be coming out in July. We're looking at the second week of July, right after July 4th. And these then the guidance documents will be open for the states and the tribes to begin to apply for their dollars to pull them down. And part of that application has to develop, they have to essentially have a J40 plan of how they're going to meet those requirements, but also plans around income verification, because these rebates are based on household income, as well as the point of sale requirement, right, that these come with. Now, a state can basically say, although these rebates are open between 80% and 150% AMI, we want ours to just focus on this group of individuals, and the states have full authority to determine how they want to kind of craft those. I think the CGIS map could really help in determining what parts of a community should get an investment. But remember, there's about 10 or 12 different kind of data sets that essentially make up a Justice 40 community. It's not just that they're energy burdened, they may be Justice 40 because of legacy pollution issues in that area, and has nothing to do with cost of energy, right? So it isn't necessarily the best tool, but I think the White House has published this as a way to help demystify what parts of our communities do count towards Justice 40. And as we're designing our programs, ideally using those maps to ensure that the benefits are flowing to those households. And I'm adding the community benefits plan details to the chat. There's also a great FAQ in there that breaks down kind of details about this, as well as a downloadable kind of set of resources.
Chris, for mentioning the chat, I wanted to note that we have about 8 resources, links to resources that are already mentioned in the chat window. So if you haven't checked that out already, please do so. I will also be trying to pull some of these resources and make those available in a follow-up filing with the commission after today's educational session. So turning back to any other questions that we might have here for our speakers. Again, bottom row of your screen for WebEx, there should be a series of buttons that you can click, and one of them is the raise hand button. Please use that just so you can enter the queue.
While we're waiting on a question, I did want to just mention a new resource that we have launched here at DOE over the last month for consumers, and it's kind of a one-stop shop energy saving hub, it's called, and I'm going to put it in the chat. It's just energy.gov/save, but we received a lot of interest from, you know, residents and Americans across the country just asking DOE to create a portal where they can just better understand what rebates and incentives they can take advantage of, whether they're a homeowner, whether they're a renter, or they're a driver. And so there's 3 different personas, and this is version 1.0 of this tool, but certainly we're working on adding other calculators and kind of helping this tool to tailor based on your unique situation, kind of what those resources are. So check out the Energy Savings Hub and adding that here in the chat.
Hi, Joey. This is Deirdre. I had a quick question for you all. Is there a who in DOE would be, I guess, the Justice 40 coordinator if one exists, like a central person or agency or organization. And then so that's one, like who in DOE is kind of in charge of kind of coordinating the Justice 40 initiatives in DOE itself. And then is there an interagency group that comes together with other agencies to discuss Justice 40 initiatives, also with the White House? So if the initiative came out as an executive order, so I don't know if there's someone in the White House that's kind of doing a overall coordination with other agencies. And if so, I would really be interested in knowing who that is, and then also who specifically within DOE handles Justice 40.
So I've been putting a couple links in the chat, Deirdre. One of them is we have a DOE Office of Economic Impact and Diversity. They're essentially our equity and justice office here, led by the Honorable Shalonda Baker. And they really are the DOE's kind of central office for all things equity, Justice 40, and addressing environmental justice. There is essentially several working groups that have been established here at DOE that is made up of various program offices. And as you can imagine, each office is also staffing up to build that competency within each program office. Like here at SCEP, we actually have a position that we're going to soon post to hire on a lead for supporting tribes and disadvantaged communities. In terms of the White House Justice 40 initiative, I also put that in the chat, and you may be aware that just over the last few weeks, maybe a month ago, the president also signed a new executive order renewing our commitment to environmental justice. Part of that is creating a new working group on environmental justice and a new Office of Environmental Justice out of the Council on Environmental Quality. And so my understanding is they are going to be the lead coordinators for this effort. But Justice 40 itself is an interagency initiative and is something that is being coordinated out of the White House. And I'll, again, the link there in the chat, I think, has the most recent information.
Thank you.
Of course.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'll also add at the White House level is also something called the IIJA, which I think it stands for the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council. I hope I got that right. But that was established by Executive Order 14008, which is tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. So that was one of the other executive orders that kind of gave life to this IIJA. But it also, one interesting thing about that is that the Advisory Council does include a diverse set of geographical regions and members that represent these regions to serve in a voluntary capacity. I'll look that up and I'll provide a link for that. I'm not sure who might be representing the Maryland region, but I will add a link there as well. But yeah, I think the Advisory Council kind of makes sure that the administration's work is kind of informed by expertise and lived experience of environmental justice leaders. And so I think there are a handful of folks that are a part of this Advisory Council.
Thank you.
And the ED office also did a great job. The link I just posted now is the J40 covered programs at DOE, and did a whole study and identified over 140 different grant and technical assistance programs across just Department of Energy that met the Justice 40 criteria. And so they did a great job kind of pulling that all together into one location and breaking it down by program office. So I encourage you to check that out there. And they're usually pretty good at responding to outreach and inquiries. And so their contact us page on the ED website is probably a good go-to for that.
Thank you, Chris and Davey. All right, still looking to see if we still have anyone who would like to ask a question. And as we're waiting, let me ask one of my own. So about the funding, there's clearly there's a whole lot out there for all of us to digest, and there's a lot in terms of the dollars that are on the table. we'd like to know, and this was relevant under the competitive programs of the Grid Deployment Office, but to what extent are the funding monies available on an annual cycle, or are the cycles blocked for longer periods of time? What are we looking at in terms of folks taking back all this information, digesting it, and then figuring out what they want to do to take advantage of what's out there? Is it too late, or is there going to be an annual consideration, an opportunity to apply?
So I'll just start out by saying it depends. There's a lot of the funding that came, at least to the SCEP office, that is a one-time funding opportunity based on the bipartisan infrastructure law. So the EECBG block grant that'll flow to Maryland, the workforce provisions that'll flow to Maryland, the public school and nonprofit grants that'll flow into your state. Those are one-time grants. Although they are eligible for over the course of the next 8 years. And so depending on the grant and the amount determines how many kind of bites at the apple we'll have. So an example, we have $500 million for the public schools. Basically what we decided to do is 4 tranches of 80+ million per year that will flow over the next 4 years, right? With the first one happening in 2023. But the nonprofits grant, that's only 50 million, that's only a one-time, and we only intend to open it up one time. We don't intend to have kind of multiple rounds because it's only $50 million, and we want to try to get the funds out as quick as possible. And then the third situation is a fund like the State Energy Program, where we have annual dollars, but we also have SEP bill dollars on top of that, right? And so what we've been doing is breaking the SEP bill dollars into different tranches. And so for weatherization, we opened it up, the bill dollars, for the first 15% for the states to pull down. And then we opened 35%. And then lastly, the last 50%. So 3 different, ways to pull down the money. And so that's broken out just to ensure that the requirements that are incorporated into bill for those particular grants are incorporated into how the states are rolling out those programs, right? So the idea is to kind of break up the money. We intend to do the same with the rebates. We have right now the first guidance document open to the states for the home energy rebates, but that's only for 5% of the money. And then the second guidance document will open up in July. Like I mentioned, second week of July is our goal. And that will open up the rest of the dollars. 95% of the dollars now will be open for the states to start pulling down. So it really depends on the provision. Bill is primarily between now and, it kind of has a 6 to 8 year tail, depending on the type of provision. And IRA is actually a 10-year provision. And so it's from, 2022 to 2032. And all of those tax credits that Davey talked about, those are, to my understanding, unlimited in terms of the amount that we could benefit from. It's just based on how many credits people are going to realize, right? The rebates are limited based on how much has been appropriated, but the tax credit side is kind of open in terms of how much investment tax credits we're going to pull down, right? That's going to be based on the market. So Davey and Hans, any additional thoughts on that?
Just from the LPO perspective, the funds that I mentioned, the $250 billion for energy infrastructure, the $40 billion for clean energy, we have to have conditional commitments for that, for any loan guarantee under that authority by September 30th, 2026. Does not mean that the funds have to be spent by the borrower by that time, but we only have until the September 30th, 2026 to get loans committed. So it's an accelerated timeline, and yeah. We could also have a reauthorization, Congress willing, that would create additional authority after 2026, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we are working hard to turn these one-time dollars into annually appropriated dollars. We see, tremendous amount of demand in the public school grants. As an example, we had over 1,000 concept papers come through. And out of an $84 million pot for the first round, I think we had close to $6 billion in requests. It was like 40 times the amount that we even had available. So the demand for just the public schools hopefully is encouraging Congress to think about an annual appropriation that can help create an ongoing fund for this type of work. At this point in time, though, we have what has been authorized, and we're going to do our best to drive as much impact and show what can happen if we have these programs roll into more regular annually appropriated grants.
Our colleague Davey is having some connection issues, so hopefully he'll be able to rejoin us here momentarily.
Okay, so thank you guys. So while we're waiting for Davey, how much of the programs are tied to or require, and this is particularly relevant for state, local applicants, like the Public Service Commission, for example, or another state agency that may not, okay, to the extent that there's, let's say, a cost sharing element, and we see some of these in particular, like I mentioned earlier before in our last presentation, our last educational session, we heard about this from the Grid Deployment Office. To the extent that there are cost sharing requirements, are there identified partners, eligible partners that state agencies, local governments can look to work with them to get, some of the funding through?
That's a good question, Andrew. I don't know if there's kind of a preferred vetted list of potential partners, and it really does also depend on the specific grant, whether there's a match requirement or not. As an example, we are trying to reduce match requirements on the public schools and the nonprofit grants because we realize those are pretty resource constrained stakeholders that often don't have, available capital to do these types of projects. And hopefully, this grant will seed their capabilities of doing that further. So, yeah, in terms of that, there are certain waivers for cost share and certain considerations. The other thing to think about is Buy American, Build American, Buy American, so the BABA provisions, and really trying to use domestic content within the infrastructure that we're installing, as well as the Davis-Bacon provisions, which are really about workforce and prevailing wage and ensuring that those that are working on these projects are at least meeting, minimum standards for labor.
I'm not totally sure, Joey, if your question was intended for the loan category. But typically our projects are private sector initiated, and an applicant would come to us with the project that they wanted to build or create. With the CEFI category, with our eligibility to provide loans to projects that states support, they would be coming to the state for a piece of their funding, meaningful contribution to the project. But for the most part, that the company that's probably the one, it's probably a company that is doing a project would have private financing lined up.
Great, thanks. I thought as much on that end. We just hit the 3 o'clock mark, and so I want to put it out there, last call for questions. And I don't see any. Of course, you can interrupt me if you want to go ahead and ask anyway. I want to thank our speakers again, Chris, Davey, Hans, for your time and sharing so much information today. And as I mentioned early at the start of this Q&A session, we will make a recording available on the Commission's YouTube channel site. Some folks have asked in the chat about slides and getting a copy of the slides. And if that's all right, I can follow up with our speakers to get slides. And then we can, well, as we did with the first educational session, filed a copy of the presentation slides, PDF versions in the PC56 docket, and happy to do that again following this session. But then I also plan on emailing a copy of the PDF versions of the slide decks to those individuals who RSVP'd, and we have a list of the email addresses. So we'll do that as well. Right, so I think that's it for questions. Again, thank you all for this really great session. And I want to thank our attendees for taking time out of the day to join us, and let's go get it.
Good luck, Marilyn. Thank you all. Keep up the great work.
Good afternoon.
Thank you so much.
You too.